Welcome back to the Scoliosis Dialogues. I'm Grant Hogue from Boston Children's Hospital, and today I have the honor of interviewing our current Scoliosis Research Society president, Marinus de Kleuver. As you very well know, the SRS is an international research and education group, and it has grown from an initial 37 members that were primarily all from the US and Canada to now thousands of members worldwide. As such, many of us don't know each other very well. So would you mind telling our listeners and people who are watching on video a bit about yourself and your practice, how you came to be involved in the SRS?
Thank you, Grant. Yeah, so my name is Marinus de Kleuver. I'm the current president of the Scoliosis Research Society. I like to see myself as a spine surgeon with a very holistic view. I treat pediatric and adult spine pathology at a large university medical center in the Netherlands. I started out in orthopedics. My PhD was actually on pelvic surgery. I did a lot of hip surgery and spine surgery the first 10 years of my practice. And then it became just spine. And then the last 10 years or so, 8 years, it's purely spine deformity. And the big advantage is that it's given me, as I said, somewhat holistic view to patients rather than just studying an X-ray and banging in some pedicle screws. I really enjoy the person and the people and the team that's involved. So I worked at the university where I am now for 8 years. We've grown our spine program over the past years, and we're very proud of that. And we just hosted the SRS Traveling Fellows just last week, who came to visit us for 2 days. That, in a nutshell, is who I am.
You know, I just saw the SRS Traveling Fellows and their Instagram account with all of the pictures from visiting you at your center, and it looked wonderful. And so I didn't know previous to this introduction that you had spent quite a time doing kind of pelvic surgery. And so how important do you think it is for the spine deformity surgeon to truly understand pelvic and hip kinematics, and what advantage has that given you?
I think there's several aspects to it. First of all, I'm a little bit concerned that as spine surgeons and spine deformity surgeons, we've become too, call it organ-centric. We can treat one organ and can't think about anything else. I actually prefer to talk of a spinal deformity as a deformity of the trunk. It's not just the spine. And it's not just the X-ray and the bones, it's the muscles, it's the soft tissues, it's the hips and the pelvis. And I actually did my PhD in pelvic osteotomy surgery, which is mostly treating adolescents and young adults. I think it's not just the kinematics when you talk about the current discussions we're having about sagittal alignment, that obviously comes into play, but it's also things like, can you examine someone who has a stoop posture, and can you identify whether they have a flexion contracture of the hip? And they might need just a simple hip arthroplasty rather than a spinal osteotomy. So I think the hip surgery and the somewhat more holistic view has been important. I actually did 3 years of general surgery before I went into orthopedics. So all of those things I think are hugely valuable. And I'm very much aware that in the changing environment, that may not be as easy or easy is the wrong word, but as common as it was in the past. But the fact that I did 3 years of general surgery, I did abdominal surgery, I did thoracic surgery, I can do my own anterior approaches, I can do pelvic osteotomies. It's taught me a lot of soft tissue handling, treating vessels, treating other organs, which I think is really important as a spine surgeon. So it's made me definitely a better surgeon, even though I haven't done any hip surgery probably in 12, 13 years.
But that's really interesting. And that background has certainly given you the ability to not only prescribe, but dose surgery correctly.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the other things I've learned is as our surgical techniques get better and better, and our patients that we can treat are becoming more frail, whether they're pediatric or adult patients. You know, the young patients are frail or vulnerable, and so are elder patients. And it's not just an age issue. Generally, the two ends of the spectrum. We really have to learn when to say no. And I think that's where, again, we're not treating X-rays, we're treating actually a trunk deformity. And we have to be able to say no and identify the right patient. I think that may actually be the holy grail for the coming decade of spine surgery, when and how to treat patients, and not just how, but also when. There's a lot of focus on how, but I think when may also be very important. You know, elderly patients sometimes have horrible quality of life, but they may be able to survive just using a walker. So it's not always that this astute posture requires surgery, but there are, of course, patients who have huge benefit from spine surgery. So finding that sweet spot, I think, is the holy grail for the next 10 years or so.
That's excellent. And so moving from clinical practice into the SRS presidency. And so what are the week-to-week responsibilities of an SRS president? And how have you needed to modify your clinical or research practice to make time for the duties of the presidency?
Well, that is we'll start with that one first. You have to modify your program. So the great thing about the SRS, which I honestly really enjoy, love, you could say, is it's an international community. And I keep using that word community whenever I come somewhere. It's a network organization, a community of somewhat like-minded people. We're diverse, but at least we have a common goal. And that I find really inspiring, but that automatically brings with it that being a global community, you have to communicate with people in the US, in Asia, in Latin America. And that takes time. And we're small enough that you really can impactfully discuss things and meet people all around the world without being too far, literally and also virtually at a distance. So communicating with people is important, which means that one of the biggest roles that I see as a president is being an ambassador. The danger or the risk is that before you know, you're just traveling from meeting to meeting, carrying the SRS flag. I don't think that's justified nowadays, partly because of time away from hospital and home, and partly also if you look at the environmental impact. I think we need to be more careful of how we spend our dollars, but also how we spend them wisely environmentally. So I've actually traveled a lot, having said that, but I try to travel about once a month. And that's a little bit less than previous presidents. Now, of course, the pandemic and Zoom and Teams has made it easier to have meetings online, so there's less need for travel. But in this past year, I've traveled to Japan, Hong Kong, Brazil, traveled within Europe, traveled to the US several times. So basically quite a long trip with quite a big time difference, at least once a month. As I said, that's an important ambassador role, but that means that's time away from the hospital. And generally, if I come back from a long trip, I don't go into surgery the next day. So you really have to adapt your hospital schedule. My university has been kind enough to give me, I'm salaried, I have a full employment at the university. My university hospital and my orthopedic group has been so kind as to give me a day in the week for this. So it's like taking a sabbatical, but instead of taking a 2 or 3 month sabbatical or a 6 week sabbatical, I've just taken a day in the week. So, for example, this afternoon, I'm having this interview with you during my SRS half day in this week. So my hospital has really facilitated it. And I think it's really important for people to understand and to appreciate how much my predecessors have done to build this opportunity. So we have what's called a presidential line, which means I'm the current president. Next year, I'll be past president. The year before I was incoming president, we call it president-elect. And the year before that, you are vice president. So it's 4 years in the presidential line. And the third year is actually the year that you're president. And in that presidential line, that gives you 2 years to kind of grow into it. And so Serena Hu and Chris Shaffrey were my predecessors, and they've been instrumental in helping me learn to get to know the society. And then the office in Milwaukee with Ashley and her team is super. They make it possible. But it still requires, I do my emails almost every evening. It still requires time during the week to do some proper things like looking at budgets or looking at documents or some thought processes. And then it requires travel. So all in all, quite impactful on your calendar. For me, it's been absolutely worthwhile, but it's not something that I think is sustainable if you just kind of do it on top of a full practice and think that you can keep all those things in the air, because then one of the other topics which I'll talk about also in my presidential address is actually physician well-being and how we kind of stress ourselves we are all very ambitious, but there's a limit to what you can do. So for me, it's had a significant impact on my clinical practice.
And so I think that's a really important point to make for anyone listening or watching is the SRS presidency is not a 1-year service
No,
agreement. This is
it's
a 4-year service agreement with
yeah,
likely a decade before that building up to the position, learning about the organization, and
absolutely,
truly being a servant leader.
absolutely.
So the presidential line is ultimately a 4-year commitment with people going before you and people coming after you. And so how does that work? How do you work together? What is the mentoring process as you go along?
That's a wonderful question, because I think that's actually the secret to success of the SRS. So we have what's called a presidential line. It is indeed 4 years, and there's a lot of mentorship and collegiality there, and camaraderie. So I've really enjoyed it. The SRS is quite a lot of work, but it's actually been very, very rewarding and enjoyable. So I got onto the presidential line as what's called vice president. And then the year after, you become president-elect. And the third year, you're president, which is my current year. And then next year, I will be past president. So when I was vice president coming in, Chris Shaffrey was president. So he mentored me. And it's great to get to know Chris Shaffrey better, and especially if we talk about the diversity of our organization, he being a neurosurgeon, and I've done some educational courses with him, hands-on course with him, but actually working with him as a colleague was really, really rewarding. After Chris Shaffrey, when I moved into being the president-elect, Serena Hu was the president. Again, a woman from the west coast of the US, again, diverse compared to my own background, interesting international perspective. She mentored me. She started the lead program within the SRS. And this current year, I'm the current president, and Laurel Blakemore is following after me. So this 4-year trajectory is really impactful, because you become a gang or a team. You take the responsibilities together. There's always someone you can call for advice. So it's absolutely not lonely at the so-called top.
So each president or person in the presidential line obviously has specific endeavors or projects that they're passionate about, and that they want to see through during their tenure. So what have been your major goals during your tenure, and how do you see those coming out now and for the future?
Yeah, so we try to avoid, as presidents or president line, to have a pet project, because as we said, the institutional continuity is really important. It can't be that I have a pet project and then Laurel after me has something completely different. So we have a strategy. We do have themes, and I think the theme for this year was basically, could be summarized as the true post-COVID era. We had, as everybody else, significant challenges financially, less sponsorship, less attending to our meetings, increasing costs, massive increase in costs. So organizing a meeting, the cost for the organizing of a meeting nowadays for a venue, for example, are about 30 to 40% higher. Travel, especially in Asia, is ridiculously more expensive than it used to be. So we have a real challenge in costs, which have gone up, and revenues, which have gone down. And human behavior has changed over the pandemic. So a lot more online and Zoom meetings, less travel. People make more conscious choices about whether they come to a meeting or a conference or not. So the theme this year has been trying to find the new normal. And I think we've been very successful. I really do use the word we consciously. So the IMAS meeting we had in San Diego was very good. The numbers are back up, both attendance and financially. The annual meeting, which is in 10 days' time in Barcelona, is absolutely going like anything. Registration is really high. The meeting is going. The buzz about the meeting is fantastic. So the meeting in Barcelona, mid September, is going to be wonderful. We've been building our relationship with our corporate and industry sponsors, who've been very supportive. They also have their challenges. There's huge pressures on our industry partners, so they've been very, very supportive. And our members have stood up. We have 22 committees within the society, and all those committees, we're a volunteer organization. None of us get reimbursed, and yet we all deliver. So the society is finding its way again in this post-pandemic phase. So I suppose you could say rebalancing after the pandemic, which is both financially and looking at what we do and don't do. So our meetings, we've changed some aspects of our meeting. Some of our offerings we've reduced. For example, we have these podcasts, but we used to have webinars, and webinars were really expensive to run, and the return was limited. So we thought we'd like to do everything, but we can't do everything. So we've actually stopped doing the webinars. There's some other educational offerings which we've actually reduced. So we've actually made some painful choices, and our membership and our committees and our network, as I mentioned, has really kind of flourished over the last year. So the theme has been, I suppose you could call it rebalancing after the pandemic, which isn't just financial rebalancing, but much more finding our new way. And that has been very successful because our membership numbers are still increasing, our attendance is still increasing, our financial numbers are recovering. So I'm actually very proud of what we as a board and as a society have done over the past year.
I think that's a really interesting point that you make about being careful in how you curate all of the offerings of the society, whether it's deciding what is most useful for membership and education, be it webinars, podcasts, in the realization that as a very large group of very bright individuals, you can do anything, but you can't do everything.
Yes. And that means also sometimes saying no to people who are very enthusiastic. Rarely needs to be done, but sometimes you have to say no. And again, coming back to the presidential line and the board and the council chairs, that has been a very collaborative and consensus-based discussion. And I think I would almost call it evolutionary. So we're adapting to the new environment. There's an evolution in how we as a society evolve. We've made some clear choices, but they haven't been brutally painful. They may have been painful in certain areas, but they haven't been brutally painful. We haven't had to amputate an arm or a leg, as it were. And I think that's because the board has been very aware throughout the pandemic and after of our responsibilities. And I like the word curating through this. In a way, we have to guide our society. And I'm honored that people have trusted me to become the president of the society. I take it really seriously. And I think we all have. And that comes a little bit back to your original question, what does your week look like? It means that for me, it's my hospital work, my family, and the SRS. I don't do any work for any other societies at the moment because you just can't keep all those balls in the air. And that's kept me sane. And the support from, as I said, Ashton's team and the board has been tremendous.
And so up to this point, you've mentioned an economic challenge for all societies, the SRS being one. And you have mentioned the clinical challenge for spine surgeons is kind of figuring out who not to operate on, right? So you referenced someone with stooped posture who might do well with a walker in old age rather than surgery. The SRS is also an educational platform in and of itself. And currently we have an expansion of enabling technologies through not only the SRS, but even places that the SRS may not touch. And these technologies include surgical planning, intraoperative safety, optimization for quality of life. Some enabling technologies are not necessarily available in every environment, and some are more readily available. So how does the SRS incorporate that into education measures going forward?
I think the SRS being global, as I think I mentioned earlier, about 2/3 of our current members are from the US or North America, but half of our new members are from outside North America. And the dynamics, the healthcare environment, the dynamics are very different in every continent. And even within a continent. Northern Europe is very different to Southern Europe. Japan is very different to Southeast Asia. There are some commonalities. One of them is that costs are a problem for all societies. And so cost pressures are there everywhere. And that means that for more and more environments, capital intensive investments are a challenge when I'm talking about enabling technology. So I don't believe a robot is going to be solving everybody's problems all the time. However, robots are pushing the envelope, as people say, by developing new technologies. And once we combine that with other technologies, it is definitely a way to go to make our surgery more predictable. My father's an engineer, and he just cannot grasp the fact that we can put pedicle screws into someone's spine just with hand instruments. So definitely there, and I think we are close to a point where it's becoming more and more realistic to use this in daily practice. Having said that, most robots are sold currently in North America. You need extra people in the room, you need extra investments, you have extra maintenance costs. So it's not going to be accessible to a large part of the world. However, a lot of the technologies that these robots use, such as planning software, evaluation, is going to be hugely impactful. And I think if you take the whole manuals, as it were, of knowledge dissemination, talking that we as a society do, educating people about techniques, we do with, for example, our hands-on courses, or as you just mentioned, we have checklists for safety in surgery. We have an absolutely outstanding website with resources, which is, I believe, underutilized. If you ever need to know anything about deformity, just go to the website, go to the resource center there, and there's papers there, articles there, checklists there, position statements are there. So there's a lot of information available. And then I think if you look at the outside our own little circle, I think especially our corporate partners in industry is developing absolutely wonderful software for planning, execution. Then you'll get to aspects like enabling with whether it's navigation or robotics. And I think the next phase is also datafication when we look at outcomes. So currently, we have research nurses who put in a lot of data into, if they're careful, even on paper. Sooner or later, we should be able to start getting data from electronic medical records and start trawling through some of that data to get larger data sets, because we kind of think, oh, we've got a really large set of 1,000 patients. But if you look at cardiology, they talk about 10,000 patients or 100,000 patients. So yes, we'd like to datify. Yes, our population is very diverse. One adult deformity is not the same as another adult deformity, or an early onset is not the same as every other early onset. So there's a huge diversity, but I think datification will play a role there. But I think if you look at the biggest gains, I think the biggest gains can be done before surgery, patient selection, and planning. I think those are the two biggest gains. And there, I think as a society, we can play a big role in facilitating that.
That's excellent. So one final question. September 10th to 14th, in just a few weeks, you will be presiding over the 59th SRS Annual Meeting in Barcelona, Spain. What are the behind-the-scenes duties of the president during the annual meeting, and what are you most excited about for this year's meeting?
So the president has a lot of responsibilities. Quite a lot of them are behind the scenes, and I'm just opening my calendar now just to see what I have that week. And basically, my whole calendar is full with committee meetings, because as I mentioned, we have more than 20 committees, and they all get together if they can. And I try and attend and be present at not all of them, but quite a few of them. And then, of course, there's the role which I mentioned before, which is like the ambassador or the diplomat. I open the meeting, I close the meeting. We have awards, we have HIBS awards, Best Paper awards, we have Lifetime Achievement awards. We have a Harrington lecturer, who's Steve Glassman this year, and we have a Steele lecture, which is Mr. Dubois. The Steele lecture is always a highlight of the year because we have a presentation on a non-spine topic. And this year, when we're in Barcelona, at the same time, the America's Cup is occurring. And for those who don't know, the America's Cup is probably the biggest sailing event in the world. And the leader of the French team is coming to speak to us during the Steele lecture. And I have the honor of introducing him. And Steve Glassman is giving a talk on a Harrington lecture, which is always a spine dedicated topic, and he's giving a lecture on the Friday. Then, of course, there's the wining and dining, as it were, which means we have our welcome ceremony and welcome reception, where it's great just to meet friends from all across the world. And we have the closing gala on the Friday evening. Again, a chance to meet and mingle and network. So basically, my brain is switched on 24/7. I enjoy meeting people. I enjoy mixing with people. And I think for us, it's a really unique opportunity to meet people who voice experience and knowledge from across the world. It opens your mind when you hear people do things in a completely different way, and it makes you wonder sometimes. And if your mind is open enough to listen to those responses, you kind of think, "Ooh, that's very smart." So I really enjoy the aspect of the annual meeting of not just having meetings and just having committee meetings and formal roles, but it's the informal role, which I think is also hugely impactful. So the annual meeting, as you mentioned, 10th to the 14th, Barcelona, the highlight of the year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing the podcast today. Thank you for your service to the SRS. Thank you for being a teacher and an educator for all of us. And I hope to see you and everyone else at the annual meeting.
Grant, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time, and really enjoyed this discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Have a great day.